A Mochi moment from Sadie, who writes, I'm not crying, you're crying. This is what I said during my first appointment with my physician at Mochi, because I didn't have to convince him I needed a GLP-1. He understood, and I felt supported, not judged. I came for the weight loss and stayed for the empathy. Thanks, Sadie. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Sadie is a Mochi member compensated for her story.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings,
and
Killer Communications.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1982. Police in Council Bluffs, Iowa received a call to the Best Western Village Inn, located at 2216 27th Avenue, at the intersections of I-29 and I-80. The call came in on June 25th at 12:27 p.m. Arriving officers Larry Charlson and Lyle Brown were greeted by the motel manager, who led them to room 106 on report of a possible dead person. Room 106 was dark except for the small bedside table lamp between the two beds being illuminated and the TV loudly showing Channel 7. The officers noted a white female lying on her back on the left hand of the two beds as they were facing into the room, the westernmost bed. The woman was dead. She wore a pale blue nightshirt pushed up over her breasts and no pants, but a towel was draped over her waist area. A single stab wound glared below her left breast. Blood was smeared on her arm near the pillow and on her torso. Blood also marred a pillow next to the left side of her body. One arm was still tucked underneath her, and restraint marks encircled her visible right wrist. Her arms had clearly been tied behind her back. Rescue squad personnel also arrived, as did Officers Montaigne and R.L. Miller. Everyone was herded out of the room, and Officer Miller guarded the door to preserve the scene. They called in the county medical examiner, Dr. Samuel Rosa, and the criminalistics division's Larry McGlade. The dead woman was tentatively identified from the motel registry and papers in her briefcase as Lee Rotatori, age 32, of Michigan. Dr. Rosa, the Pottawatomie County medical examiner, arrived at the Best Western and pronounced the stabbing victim, Lee Rotatori, dead at the scene. While Lee was still lying in place, they brought in a criminalist from the Nebraska State Patrol right across the river, who was experienced with new technology designed to facilitate lifting fingerprints from human bodies. She went through the process of attempting to do this on Lee, but no usable prints were found. After this was done, and the Council Bluffs PD criminalist had completed his investigation, Lee was taken to Mercy Hospital, where an autopsy was performed by Doctors Rosa and Runge at 7 p.m. on the 25th. Dr. Rosa removed Lee's light blue nightshirt. It bore the inscription, "I wore this nightshirt at SIV and never got any rest." She was also noted to be wearing pearl earrings and a gold necklace. The pathologists observed a single deep stab wound under Lee's left breast. This penetrating knife wound was the cause of death, as it had entered the right ventricle, nicked the left ventricle, and pierced the pericardium. It was inflicted by a large knife, approximately 3 centimeters in width, which left a 3.5 centimeter long and 3/4 centimeter wide gaping wound in Lee's chest. Notes indicate, quote, subject bled to death or possibly drowned in her own blood. Marks on Lee's wrists indicated that she'd been bound with both arms behind her back, and a white residue that was believed to be adhesive tape indicated that Lee's mouth had been covered from ear to ear, and her eyes had also been covered by this tape. None of these things were found at the crime scene. A sexual assault kit was performed and breast swabs collected along with the typical vaginal, anal, and oral swabs and smears. Fingernail scrapings and cuttings and pubic hair combings were also collected. The autopsy report by pathologist R.G. Runge states, quote, the acid phosphate level, as well as the number of spermatozoa identified on the vaginal smears, indicate sexual intercourse occurred a relatively short time before death, end quote. In other words, it was a robust, fresh sample left inside her by Lee's killer. The time of death estimate was arrived at in conjunction with information from the investigators in the motel room. The pathologists observed the contents of Lee's stomach, which was described as a, quote, considerable amount of partially digested semi-solid food. In other words, she had probably eaten within 4 hours of dying. Time of death on the death certificate was placed at 2 a.m. on June 25th, after some information on Lee's last meal was found in her motel room. Before we go any further, let's talk about who Lee was. Lee Gonzalez Rotatori was born on September 29, 1949, in Fargo, Cass County, North Dakota. Her parents were Clifford and Gwendolyn Gonzalez. Lee was the oldest of 4, Lee, Ann, Thomas, and Greg, born to Gwen and Cliff. She grew up on the family farm in Rochester, Minnesota, where the family moved in March 1958 after living in upstate New York for a time. Lee loved horses and was in the Junior Rifle Club. Her siblings described her as a quiet but happy young woman who loved drawing and being around animals. She graduated from Mayo High School in 1967 and went on to get her bachelor's degree in dietary services and her master's in food nutrition from the University of Wisconsin, Monomoy. Lee worked as a regional dietitian at Unicare Health Facilities, helping to plan and implement food service programs for hospitals and other large healthcare institutions in Wisconsin and several other states. She loved her job and got to travel the region, consulting with different food service customers. Lee's mentee and friend Anita Martin described Lee as, quote, intelligent, articulate, and enthusiastic. According to the World Herald, 2 years before her death, Lee joined ServiceMaster in its Minneapolis Service Director Division. This organization placed food service managers in relevant positions at healthcare organizations around the nation. Through this role, Lee landed a position in the Food Services Division at Hackley Hospital in Muskegon, Michigan. Lee had been married while still an undergraduate to a man who was a professor of psychology. I'm calling him A. Rotatori. A was on staff at Northern Illinois University when the couple married in Olmsted, Minnesota on November 14, 1970. A was 24 and Lee was 21. The couple had a son, whom I'm calling M. But Lee and A divorced in Rockford, Illinois in September 1977. Lee went on to marry Gerald Stanley Nemke, a.k.a. Jerry, on August 15, 1978 in Madison, Wisconsin. Lee and Jerry divorced in September of 1979 and continued to live together until they remarried on December 24, 1981. Jerry later told a co-worker that his divorce was in name only, so that he could declare bankruptcy without Lee's assets being involved. Indeed, Lee appeared to be the major breadwinner in her marriages to Jerry. She was moving up in the food services industry. When she got the job at Hackley Hospital, she and Jerry moved into a mobile home at number 14 Rhonda, Crockery Estates in Nunica, Michigan, in October of 1980. Lee owned a horse which she kept at a nearby stable owned by a friend, Clara Fisher, and her husband, Bob. Lee spent a lot of time at the Fisher farm, going both before work and after work, and also keeping chickens, pigs, a dog, and a turkey there. In June 1982, Lee had just landed a new job at Jenny Edmondson Memorial Hospital in Council Bluffs, Iowa. She'd been offered the job of Director of Food Services at the hospital, replacing the current director who was moving on, a man named Doug G. The job was a significant enough step up that, in Lee's mind, it warranted a move from Michigan to Iowa. She had traveled to Council Bluffs to check out the hospital and assess the position, and then decided in recent weeks to take the job, and began the process of relocating and looking into where to move the mobile home she and Jerry lived in. As Lee went through orientation in Council Bluffs during the week of June 21st to 25th, Jerry remained back in Michigan to finalize things for the move. Lee's former coworker and friend Anita was supposed to go to Council Bluffs to stay with Lee for the weekend of June 25th. Instead, she attended a memorial service for Lee on July 1st in Rochester, Minnesota, where Lee was interred. Okay, let's talk about the scene, Lee's motel room. The Best Western was a large motor lodge right at the intersection of two major interstates, and it was full to the brim on the night of June 24th. Council Bluffs had a population at the time of about 60,000, but the motel's location right at the convergence of two major highways vastly increased the suspect pool. Further, the area was hosting the College World Series at the time, so people were in town from all over the country, and many were staying at the Best Western. Room 106, Lee's room, was located on the ground floor of the motel just off the reception area, near the doors leading to the motel's meeting rooms and pool. There was also a restaurant and bar, and Lee's room was around the corner, right where the rooms commenced. It was a fairly high-traffic area. Her killer had to walk right through all that to get to her door. For people walking into the hotel room, the bathroom was on the immediate right, and the TV was straight ahead, next to a low two-drawer bureau thing that faced the foot of the two double beds. The room was decorated in very dark maroon chenille bedspreads, dark brown shag carpeting, oxblood wood and leather furniture, and a mural of a rose garden and gate on the wall. Lee lay dead on the right side of the bed closest to the door, next to the wall separating the room from the bathroom. Sergeant Larry McGlade, the CBPD criminalist, arrived at 12:45 and began his investigation of the motel room. The room didn't at all appear to be in disarray. Furniture wasn't overturned, nothing was broken. In fact, the room was as neat as a pin, except for some bloodstains on the wall next to the body on the bed. But there was also a perplexing mess on the floor. Around 100 small pieces of what appeared to be crushed bits of green spongy foam were scattered all over the short hallway between the entrance door and the bathroom. The second bed in the room, the unoccupied one, was also neatly made. On it lay a large brown suitcase-style briefcase containing notes, papers, and files in the name of Lee Rotatori. A half-written letter dated June 24th, 1982, and addressed to her mom and dad also lay on this second bed. The letter told her parents how much she liked it in Council Bluffs and how excited she was for her new job and the move. She told them all about what she'd done that week, getting to know people at the hospital and going boating with her new friends. She was excited to learn to water ski, she said. On the small table between the two double beds, the lamp was on, the white push-button phone was facing the bed Lee was on as if she had been using it in bed, and a pink Tab can sat undisturbed. Several pairs of women's shoes were lined up on the floor at the base of the bureau. Clothes hung neatly in the closet. A bra and panties were folded on the bureau, and an Elton John t-shirt, cut-off jean shorts, and a green bathing suit were folded in the bureau's drawers. Officer Brown noted that a pair of belted women's jeans lay, somewhat incongruously among the neatly organized personal items, on the floor in front of the bureau. The room was dusted for prints after the scene was photographed. Various pieces of evidence were collected, including the foam stuff on the floor, the blood-stained bedding from the bed Lee lay on, the wastepaper basket contents, which included McDonald's wrappers and a receipt, the Tab soda can, and so on. Numerous personal items, presumably belonging to the victim, were also collected from the surface of the bureau. These were things like a silver thermos, car keys, a motel key, sunglasses, a box of Ritz crackers, and a Tupperware of cookies. Lee had been ironing a white piece of clothing, and it was still spread across the desk surface along with the iron. A small blue and white Igloo cooler was set neatly next to the desk. Detective Sergeant Larry Williams, the head of CID at the time, who was on the scene and worked the case for years, said the room looked so pristine It was just as though someone had laid her on the bed.
Have you ever wiped with a piece of dry, single-ply toilet paper and wondered, is this as good as it gets? Well, it's not. It gets a lot better thanks to the wet, extra-large cleaning power of Dude Wipes. They comfortably clean up whatever TP leaves behind on your behind. It's time to stop being an a-hole to your b-hole and start experiencing the confident clean of Dude Wipes. Available at Amazon and at major retailers nationwide. Dude Wipes. Best clean, pants down.
Make their holiday unforgettable with a gift that says it all from Pandora Jewelry. A gift that tells a story and shows you know theirs. That doesn't just sparkle, but speaks. From new festive charms to forever rings and personal engravings.
This season, give a gift that's perfectly theirs. Whether you're shopping for a shiny surprise for your significant other, matching bracelets to celebrate your friendship, or a heartfelt gift for a family member, say more this holiday season with Pandora.
I always look forward to the holidays because I live to give all the women in my life jewelry with a little something special engraved on it, just to show them I care with something personalized. You know, I love to get some gifts myself, and a man wearing jewelry is quite cool, if you ask me. Shop now at Pandora.net or visit your closest Pandora store.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Motel records showed that Lee Rotatori had checked into room 106 on June 19th. She had registered alone and listed her vehicle as a VW Rabbit with Michigan tags, which was found parked in the motel lot. The car was impounded and searched by police, but nothing significant to the investigation was found. Some of Lee's personal possessions were found in the car, indicating that she did indeed intend to move to Council Bluffs. These included pots and pans in boxes and a piggy bank containing $104 in coins. So this was a very perplexing scene. There were no signs of a struggle within the room. There was no forced entry. It appeared whoever had attacked Lee had been allowed to enter. The bits of green foam on the floor was the only sign that a confrontation had occurred. It was also clinical seeming. The single, perfectly placed, lethal stab to the heart, the bindings and tape which were missing, and the stealth mode entry and exit led police to believe the killer had planned the entire thing and had done so well. Officers took the name and address from the envelope which accompanied the letter found on the spare bed and called the phone number listed for Mr. and Mrs. Clifford Gonzalez in Austin, Texas. They asked the woman who answered the phone if she knew Lee Rotatori, and she identified herself as Lee's mother, Gwen. Officers then had to tell her that her daughter had been murdered in room 106 of a Best Western. Gwen and her husband were shocked, of course, and contacted Lee's siblings to tell them what little they knew. Gwen and Cliff then got in the car and drove to Iowa, stopping overnight at their son Greg's home in St. Louis. They sat down with Council Bluffs police for an interview on June 26th. The Gonzaleses were shocked at the murder of their oldest daughter. They gave the police the rundown of Lee's life and said they knew of no problems that Lee was having with anyone in her personal life, including her husband Jerry. They didn't see the couple often since they lived states apart, but every time they saw them, everything seemed normal. Gwen also told the officers that there was no animosity between Lee and her first husband, A. Rotatori. He got custody of their 10-year-old son. She moved on and married Jerry, and that was it. In the phone call in which Council Bluffs officers had informed Lee's mom that she'd been killed, she told them about why Lee was in town and staying in the motel. She had also told them that Lee was married. So their next phone call was to Jerry Nemke. He got on a flight to Iowa. Meanwhile, Officer Miller was tasked with taking statements of motel employees. Mildred T. was the head housekeeper for the motel. This from the report, quote, "She stated that she was training a new maid, and she wanted to demonstrate how to clean a room. At about 11:30, they went to the door of room 106. Mildred then knocked on the door and identified herself as a maid. There was no answer from inside the room, so she opened the locked door with her passkey. She looked inside the room and observed a foot on the bed. She then exited the room and closed the door, not wishing to disturb the occupant, whom she assumed was sleeping." End quote. Mildred had also noted that the TV was on quite loudly. The report continues. At about 12:20, all of the maids were in the housekeeping department eating lunch when the phone rang, and one of the maids, Sue, answered it. Sue gave the phone to her boss, Mildred, who then talked to the caller. Mildred stated that the caller sounded like a male, but his voice had no distinguishing accent or other feature. He asked her if room 106 had been done up yet. She asked the caller to identify himself. He then stated to her that the girl in room 106 was supposed to be at work and hadn't arrived. He further stated that he'd tried calling the room several times, but no one had answered. He then asked Mildred if she would check the room to see if the occupant was in there and okay. He hung up without identifying himself. Mildred recalled that room 106 was the room she'd checked an hour earlier and observed feet on the bed. She tracked down the motel's assistant manager, James D., and they went to room 106 together. Mildred knocked and said, "Housekeeping," and they could hear the TV. When there was no answer, she opened the door with her passkey. She and James walked in and approached the bed. The occupant of room 106 lay naked from the waist down atop the covers. Blood was visible on her arm, torso, bedding, and pillows around her. James said, "She's dead." It was obvious. Mildred took a towel from the bathroom and covered the dead woman's genital area. The two left the room, and Mildred called the manager and told him to summon the police. There was a dead woman in room 106. As we heard in the beginning, the manager met Officers Charlson and Brown outside the motel and accompanied them to the room. James, the manager, later told Officer Miller that chills went through him when he saw the victim on the bed. Officer Miller spoke to the maid, Sue, who'd answered the phone call from the unidentified man, asking if room 106 had been cleaned yet. She had noticed no particular type of accent, but did think that the call could have been long distance, based on the staticky connection. The maid, who was assigned to the block of rooms that included room 106, had some information for police. She was in the hallway with her cleaning cart around 8:30 a.m. that Friday morning, and she could hear that the television in room 106 was on quite loudly. She knocked on the door at that time and identified herself as housekeeping, but got no answer. So she opened the door using her passkey and called out, "Maid, do you want any maid service?" But then she saw feet on the near bed, so she exited the room quickly and shut the door. The way the room was situated, the entering maid would have seen feet on the bed before she would have seen the entire bed. She tried again at both 10:30 and 11:30, and the feet stayed in the same place, so she retreated both times. Meanwhile, CBPD Officer Howlett went to Jenny Edmondson Hospital and met with the current Director of Food Services, Doug G. He was brought into the station and interviewed. He told Officer Howlett that Lee had worked alongside him Monday through Thursday of this week in order to familiarize herself with the job. She'd come into work promptly at 8 a.m. each day that week, except for Friday. She left work around 5 p.m. each day. Doug related that on Tuesday the 22nd, after work, Lee had met Doug, his wife, and their toddler at Lake Manawa to go water skiing. Also present was the Assistant Director of Food Services, Larry B. The crew boated until dusk and then returned to Doug and his wife's house to eat. Around 9 p.m., Lee and Larry left. The next night, Wednesday the 23rd, the same crew again met at the lake around 7 p.m. and went boating. After boating, Lee followed the couple home and had ice cream, and then she went home around 10 p.m. On Thursday the 24th, they did the same, met at the lake and went boating around 7:20 p.m. Present were Doug, his kids, ages 2.5 and 6 months, Lee, and Larry. Lee left around 10, and Larry said he was going home to call his girl. Doug assumed that Lee was going back to her hotel since they were all scheduled to be at work in the hospital the next morning. But she didn't show up for work on Friday. Doug already knew her to be very timely and responsible, so when she didn't show up for work or call in, he called the motel a number of times and rang through to her room. When she didn't answer, it was he who eventually called housekeeping and asked the maid to check on the occupant of room 106. Police had found McDonald's detritus in the trash bin in Lee's room, so investigators went to the closest McDonald's on the South Expressway and sure enough learned that Lee had been into the fast food place the night before. She'd purchased food for one person to go. No one saw her actually enter the motel, but she presumably ate alone in her room, threw the trash away, and got ready for bed. Detective Williams told the World Herald that the last people to see Lee alive were apparently the McDonald's employees. I just have to point out the irony that The last meal of someone with a master's degree in nutrition was McD's. Anyway, the McDonald's purchase helped police establish the time of death since Lee's stomach was still full. Police subjected those who knew Lee in Council Bluffs, a fairly small group since she was brand new to town, to rigorous questioning. Doug, the food services director, told them he knew nothing about her activities and not much about her personal life. No, he'd never been to Lee's room. He admitted that he was the man who had called housekeeping on Friday morning, asking if Lee's room was made up. He was concerned when Lee didn't show up for work on Friday and called the motel several times but could never get an answer, so he tried the maids. He thought maybe Lee had found a different place to stay, but unfortunately she hadn't. Doug took a polygraph exam and it indicated that he was telling the truth. An officer Malin interviewed Doug's wife, who recalled that on Thursday night at the lake, Lee had been wearing cut-off blue jean shorts and a rock and roll group t-shirt of some kind. This meshed with the Elton John t-shirt and shorts and a green bathing suit found in Lee's drawer. The officer asked if Doug had left the house that night, and his wife said no, they were up and down all night with their 6-month-old daughter who was having teething problems. Doug moved way down the suspect list. Then they interviewed the assistant food service director, Larry. He acknowledged that he'd been boating with Doug and Lee and Doug's family that week. On Thursday night, he said they boated until about 9:15, and he didn't see Lee after they went their separate ways. Larry also passed a polygraph. Then police got a break on the green, spongy stuff that had been found all over the floor in room 106. Detective Sergeant Larry Williams had happened to work at a florist in another life, and he put together that the green foam stuff found in room 106 resembled the type of dark green reservoir material that the stems of flower arrangements are placed in to keep them moist. And testing revealed that he was right. It was floral oasis. The investigators had taken a piece of the material found in room 106 to a local floral shop, where the owner identified the material as oasis floral foam, very commonly used by florists. But there were no flowers found in Lee's room. Next, Officer Howlett and Detective Sergeant Williams went to the Best Western and spoke with one of the maids. They asked her if she had ever found anything to do with flowers in any of the rooms she cleaned. When they used the word styrofoam in their inquiries, it seemed to trigger a memory. She said that on Friday morning, the day Lee was found dead, she had cleaned a room that had some kind of green, dirty, crumbly stuff on the floor. It was like the stuff used in flower arrangements. Bingo! The officers asked her if she could remember what room she'd found that in, and she led them to room 259. She said when she went to clean the room, a little bit of the crumbly stuff was in the hall outside the door, and then when she opened the door, there was a lot of it inside the room on the hallway. It was crumbly and dirty, so she vacuumed it up. The next day, the officers brought the maid a piece of Oasis brand floral foam, and she said that was the exact stuff she had cleaned up in room 259. So, are you getting this? On the same day, Friday, 2 rooms in the Best Western Hotel, including Lee's room, had the same foam Oasis reserve-type material used by florists scattered throughout. The police records reflect that Council Bluffs officers went to all the floral shops in town and inquired about recent purchases and deliveries to the motel. The notes say, results negative. Detective Steve Andrews, who broke this case, also told me that within days of the murder, the police emptied all the housekeeping vacuums, searching for the remnants of the Oasis matter the maid claimed to have vacuumed up, but found none. It was a mystery.
Have you ever wiped with a piece of dry, single-ply toilet paper and wondered, is this as good as it gets? Well, it's not. It gets a lot better thanks to the wet, extra-large cleaning power of Dude Wipes. They comfortably clean up whatever TP leaves behind on your behind. It's time to stop being an a-hole to your b-hole and start experiencing the confident clean of Dude Wipes. Available at Amazon and at major retailers nationwide. Dude Wipes. Best clean, pants down.
Make their holiday unforgettable with a gift that says it all from Pandora Jewelry. A gift that tells a story and shows you know theirs. That doesn't just sparkle, but speaks. From new festive charms to forever rings and personal engravings.
This season, give a gift that's perfectly theirs. Whether you're shopping for a shiny surprise for your significant other, matching bracelets to celebrate your friendship, or a heartfelt gift for a family member, say more this holiday season with Pandora.
I always look forward to the holidays because I live to give all the women in my life jewelry with a little something special engraved on it. just to show them I care with something personalized. You know, I love to get some gifts myself, and a man wearing jewelry is quite cool, if you ask me. Shop now at Pandora.net or visit your closest Pandora store.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's estimated that at any given time there are 90,000 missing persons, and that's just in the United States. Imagine if your loved one went missing. Is there anything you wouldn't do to try to find them? Our podcast shines a light on just some of these cases. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford, and we're the host of the podcast Missing Persons. In every episode of Missing Persons, you'll hear about someone who disappeared and currently remains missing, and we'll discuss efforts to find out what happened to them.
In some cases, there are clues to follow and leads to chase down. In others, though, it's as if the person just vanished off the face of the earth.
In each episode, you'll hear from someone who's desperately searching for that missing person. And whether they've been searching for 30 days or 30 years, the struggle to find out what happened is real. There are dozens of episodes to binge on right now, and new episodes drop every other Saturday.
Will you join us and become part of the search for answers in these cases? If so, search for and subscribe to Missing Persons wherever you listen to podcasts. Officers contacted the local taxi company to see if it had transported anyone who could be the killer coming to or leaving the Best Western. Sure enough, a driver at the Happy Cab Company based in Omaha had been flagged down by a man on South 24th Street at 27th Avenue on Friday, June 25th, between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. The man had been standing on the southeast corner of the intersection. The cabbie stopped and picked up this passenger who asked to be taken to Epley Airfield in Omaha, Nebraska, which is right across the Missouri River from Council Bluffs. When the cabbie asked him which airline he wanted, the subject replied, Republic Airlines. They had no conversation during the drive, but the cabbie was able to describe the subject extensively. He was 45 to 46 years old, white male, 5 foot 7 inches tall, about 165 pounds, with brown hair, wearing brown slacks and a brown jacket, and lemon-colored or tan fancy cowboy boots. A composite drawing of this man was made and copies provided to Epley Airfield security to be handed out to all airport employees and airline crews. A list of names of all motel employees was also gathered. 2 were of particular interest. One was a maintenance man, actually a boy, who at age 17 was a senior at the local high school, moonlighting for the Best Western where his mother was also an employee. Police noted that he had punched out on the night of the murder at 10:05 p.m. They interviewed him, and at first, he said he didn't know anything about the murder, and then he asked how many times the victim had been stabbed. He was evasive with some of their questions and acted skittish. Police finally got out of him that his mother had been upset about the murder when she came home from work and told him not to talk about it, which is why he wasn't answering their questions. They decided to give this teen a polygraph. He passed and was crossed off the list. However, he also told the officers about a buddy of his who worked in the motel who liked to peek in the windows of the guests whose rooms abutted the indoor pool. Police interviewed this guy as well, and he was at work at the Best Western until after 10 on the night of the murder. But he told them he saw nothing, and he also passed a polygraph. And then police found their prime suspect. At 1:15 a.m. on June 26th, Officers Brown and Cafton interviewed Jerry Nemke, Lee's husband, age 38, who had flown into town after being notified of his wife's murder. Jerry said that Lee called him nightly from her motel in Council Bluffs while she was staying there that week. In fact, they had spoken on the evening of the 24th. He said that she told him she had been boating with friends at Lake Manawa many nights that week. Jerry said Lee loved it in Council Bluffs and planned to return to Michigan for the July 4th weekend to help him pack up for their permanent move. Jerry was able to shed some light on possessions of Lee's that should have been found but were not. She always wore an engagement and wedding ring joined together on her left hand. She also usually wore a small blue star sapphire with 2 small diamonds on each side on her right hand. She owned a lady's Seiko faux gold watch. He also told them that she had brought about $400 in paper currency with her for expense money. All of this stuff was missing. as was Lee's big brown handbag containing her wallet, her driver's license, and credit cards. It's odd that certain jewelry items were taken, yet Lee was found wearing pearl earrings and a gold necklace. Anyway, police contacted local pawn shops to try to get a bead on anyone who might have pawned these items, and they entered her credit cards and license into NCIC. But they also noted that Jerry seemed almost more concerned about the missing valuables than he did about the murder. Then they asked Jerry what he did for a living. My mouth pretty much literally dropped open when I read this line in the police report. Quote, Mr. Nemke advised that he is employed as a delivery person for a flower delivery service, end quote. Wait, what? Lee's husband worked in the floral industry, handling flowers, and a foam material used almost exclusively in the floral industry was found at the scene of her murder for completely undetermined reasons? Okay, that's the end of the episode. But wait, there's more. Jerry Nemke had a hell of a record. Council Bluffs police checked with the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan for criminal history reports on Jerry, and they hit the jackpot. They found out he had done time for murder. Here's what happened. On April 29, 1960, 17-year-old Jerry Nemke had been on a date with a 16-year-old waitress named Marilyn Duncan in southern Chicago. The two were seen together, and the following morning at 8 a.m., police found Marilyn lying along the Northwestern Railroad behind a factory at 5802 Northwest Highway. She was barely alive, lying in a pool of blood and with extensive injuries to her head and chest. A pair of sunglasses, a 5th-gallon bottle of wine, and 3 bricks were found a few feet from her body. Marilyn died in a hospital without gaining consciousness on May 1st, 1960. Marilyn's wallet found at the scene contained papers in the name of Jerry Nemke's sister. He was arrested while driving a stolen car and questioned about Marilyn's murder. He initially admitted to being out with Marilyn and even leaving his sunglasses where she was found, but he denied hurting her. However, once the chief of detectives, McMahon, took over questioning Nemke alone in the room with him, he confessed. At the state's attorney's office, Jerry signed 2 written statements confessing his guilt, which stated that he made sexual advances toward Marilyn, and when she refused, he started beating her. He beat her with his fists, strangled her, and then hit her, bashing her over the head with a brick. He then raped her and robbed her before leaving her body in the alley. Jerry was taken to the scene of the crime where he reportedly reenacted it for investigators. He was charged by the state of Illinois with murder on May 30th, 1960. To make a long story short, a very guilty Jerry Nemke was convicted of the murder of Marilyn Duncan and sentenced to death. However, less than 2 years later, in 1962, the Illinois Supreme Court overturned Jerry Nemke's conviction. The court ruled that the preliminary hearing wasn't conducted properly and that Jerry had been denied his right to counsel and not advised of his rights. The trial court judge should have allowed the preliminary hearing to consider the issue of the voluntariness of the confession, given the above issues and the fact that Jerry was a minor at the time of the crime. A second trial was held, and Jerry was again found guilty, but this time he was sentenced to 75 to 100 years in the Menard State Prison in Joliet, Illinois. But believe it or not, he was released in early 1978 after the parole board let him out. He married Lee that same year, just 6 months after they met. Lee's family had no idea that her new husband was a convicted murderer who had served nearly 18 years in prison. Okay, back to Lee's case and police interviews of convicted murderer and victim's spouse, Jerry Nemke. Police asked Jerry where he was on Thursday night, June 24th, the night they knew Lee had been slain. Jerry said he had recently started a supplemental part-time job at Gill's Standard Service Station in Spring Lake, Michigan. He was at work on Thursday night, June 24th, and he took a phone call from Lee while on his shift. He worked until the station closed at 10 p.m. The next day, he went to work in the morning at his other job as a floral delivery man for a Grand Haven florist. After his interview, the cops let Jerry go, and the next morning started trying to put him in Iowa on the night his wife was killed. They called his boss at Gill's service station in Michigan. Gill told them that indeed Jerry had worked on Thursday night the 24th, and he did take a phone call from his wife between 7 and 8 p.m. Michigan time. He overheard the phone call and said it was nothing out of the ordinary. After he hung up, Jerry told his boss his wife was looking for a place to live in Council Bluffs, and once she found one, Jerry would be moving there to be with her. The boss said Jerry worked alongside him at the filling station until closing time at 10. Okay, so 10 o'clock Michigan time is 9 o'clock Iowa time. Did Jerry have time after his shift to get to Iowa and kill his wife? It's a distance of 617 miles, a 9.5-hour drive. Since we know that Lee was dead by 8 a.m. on Friday, June 25th, that seems very unlikely. But remember the taxi driver who had picked up a man outside the motel between 2 and 2:30 a.m. who was going to the airport in Omaha. Could Jerry have flown into town, killed Lee, and flown back out? They pulled all the records of commercial flights into and out of Eppley Airfield for the night of June 24th to 25th, but they couldn't place Jerry on any of them. They also looked to see if he could possibly have chartered a private flight into Sky Harbor and the small Council Bluffs airport, but nothing. The police really dug into Jerry's every move for that 24-hour period and noticed that it seemed as though he was deliberately creating an alibi for himself. On Friday the 25th, he arrived at Lee's former hospital job to return a uniform she'd worn for work. The uniform return was done around 8 a.m. At the same time, he picked up an order of Tupperware Lee had made with her coworker. Then he went to the stable to return some items to Clara Fisher that he said Lee wanted to be sure were returned before they left town. Jerry's boss at the florist, Carl, saw him on Friday morning the 25th around 9:30 driving his flower service delivery truck on his route. The timing was tight. Council Bluffs police contacted the Michigan State Police and asked them to do some research on Jerry Nemke and Lee Rotatori. They obtained records of Jerry's long-distance calls in the month of June and interviewed the owner and other employees of the floral shop at 332 North Ferry in Grand Haven, where Jerry was an employee. They also spoke with employees at Hackley Hospital in Muskegon, Michigan. Michigan State Police also contacted a woman named Anita, one of Lee's close friends. She and others related that Lee had no enemies, and although Lee and Jerry seemed to be polar opposites, they knew of no problems the couple had. Detective Richard Griffin of the Michigan State Police told the World Herald about Lee, quote, "I haven't talked to anyone who didn't like her." As the investigation progressed, on July 6th, somewhat strangely, Lee's husband Jerry called Sergeant Williams and requested a complete list of all his wife's personal items, which were in the possession of the police. Even though on paper Jerry looked like an incredibly obvious suspect in his wife's murder with his connection to a florist and his record of murdering women, there was no way they could connect him to the crime. His alibi was rock solid since he couldn't teleport as far as they knew. There was also no evidence of a murder-for-hire plot. His financial records showed no payments out of his account. Jerry said he loved his wife and had no reason to kill her. Skeptical, the investigators turned elsewhere for answers. Police interviewed Lee's first husband, A. Rotatori. He said that during their marriage, Lee was ambitious and eager to pursue her career in the food service industry. I get the feeling that her not wanting to be a stay-at-home mom might have been an issue. A said their marriage was, quote, on the rocks, and he said that, quote, the straw that broke the camel's back, end quote, is when she started having an affair with Jerry Nemke. Per the divorce settlement between the Rotatoris, Lee agreed to pay $175 a month to A for child support of their son. She had been doing so since their divorce was finalized in 1978. A said their divorce was not particularly acrimonious and they generally got along, other than minor bickering about visitation rights. Just to clarify here, their divorce was originally filed in 1977. Jerry Nemke was in prison until early 78. A seems to be wrong about Lee having an affair with Jerry, whom she almost certainly did not meet until he was released on parole. It's possible that A hoped for a reconciliation and that he felt that Jerry ruined that chance, so he told police Lee had an affair when she really hadn't. A lived in Chicago, so he, too, was far from Council Bluffs. The original police reports don't say what his alibi was, but he must have had one because police moved on. Police had mailed a letter to every single person who stayed at the Best Western Hotel on the night of the murder, asking them to contact the police with any information. The motel was right off the interstate and next to a large truck stop, so a lot of the overnight guests were truckers. Trying to track them all down was a nightmare. However, a man who had stayed at the Best Western on the night of June 24th to the 25th reached out. He related to the police an incident in which he saw a man in the hallway at the motel who who aroused his suspicions because he seemed to be loitering. He said the man stared at him and gave him a strange look before walking away quickly and going up the stairs. He followed the man, and the man continued to scurry away while glancing back at him. The interviewee said the man appeared to be a, quote, disreputable type. He described him as a white male in his early 40s, about 5'6", 150 pounds. He was of small build and had straight, short, dark brown or black greasy hair slicked back close to his head. He was wearing an old-style suit, dark blue with either stripes or a plaid pattern, and no tie. A composite was made. A trucker who stayed in room 255 of the motel on the night of the 24th to 25th saw something that I believe was crucial. He told police that around 9:15 p.m. on Thursday night, he saw a white male walking in the hallway of the motel in the area of room 126. He was walking toward the south end of the motel. He was alone, and in his left hand held a bouquet of flowers. The trucker described this man as white, 5'4" to 5'5" inches tall, of small build, 130 pounds, with a full head of brown hair, a reddish complexion, maybe 35 years old. He was wearing a red patterned short-sleeved sports shirt and slacks or blue jeans. It struck this trucker that the bouquet of flowers the man carried didn't seem to be a professional arrangement. A sketch of the flower-carrying man was made and placed in the file. He didn't look like the guy described by the first witness. Police then tracked down the guy who had stayed in room 259. You'll recall that this was the room the maid had cleaned, who told police she had found Oasis foam material scattered in the small hallway on the Friday morning when the same material was found in Lee's room. The man, a trucker from Omaha named John Hadenfeld, sat down for an interview with Detective Larry Howlett and Officer Cafton. Hadenfeld said he checked into the Best Western around 6:15 p.m. on Thursday evening and left the next morning at 5:15 a.m. He never left his room, and he didn't see any green foam material anywhere, nor did he see or hear anything unusual. Hadenfeld was given a polygraph by Sergeant McAvoy and passed. So what was the explanation for this? Well, either Hadenfeld didn't notice the green stuff on the floor, which would have had to have been there before he checked in at 6:15, meaning it long predated Lee's murder, or the maid was mistaken about what room she saw the foam in. Lee's case went cold fairly quickly. Lee just didn't know a lot of people in Council Bluffs. She was brand new to town. Everyone she knew who might have had a motive to kill her, which was barely anyone, lived out of state. No one staying at the motel that whole week raised red flags. No witnesses had seen anything other than the two I discussed, whose sightings were tentative at best. It began to look more and more like a random murder by a transient killer, the hardest kind of case to solve. On July 4th, 1982, less than 2 weeks after the murder, Detective Sergeant Larry Williams told the Omaha World-Herald, quote, "The killer could have been 5 feet away or 1,000 miles away," end quote. The proximity of the motel to the 2980 highway interchange meant that her killer could literally have been anyone. He also commented on the lack of motive. Lee had been raped and robbed, so that could have been motive enough, but I think what he meant was the crime was very clearly planned and Lee's stabbing carefully executed. It seemed like overkill if the goal was simply to sexually assault her and steal her purse. Another thing that perplexed police was that the room wasn't ransacked. The guy hadn't torn the place apart looking for money or valuables. It's as if he knew exactly what he was there for, he got it, and he slipped into the night. According to the Iowa Cold Cases website, Council Bluffs Police Captain Eldon Jones called Lee's murder, quote, "the most perplexing case I've ever had the opportunity to be involved with," end quote. He said 6 detectives were working on it. But by January 1983, the case was covered in the local papers as one of 3 unsolved 1982 homicides in Council Bluffs. A reward was offered for information, $3,000 amassed from $1,000 donations from each of Lee's employer, ServiceMaster, the new hospital she was going to work for, and the motel's owner, Kinseth Hospitality. The next 2 decades were essentially spent working leads on the case that pertained to similar crimes. This in an email to me from Detective Steve Andrews, quote, "The original detectives also looked into cases with similar MOs in Iowa City, Coralville, Muscatine, Davenport, Burlington, Clinton, and Cedar Rapids, all Iowa cities, but found no links to this case," end quote. The investigation had hit such a brick wall that it was suspected Lee's killer might have been a rapist or serial killer who had selected her at random. So detectives spent the ensuing years looking into criminals who were in the area and or who carried out similar crimes. One man whom the original investigators considered extensively was 32-year-old clothing store manager Gregory Petoskey of Moline, Illinois. He was arrested in 1981 and accused of being the so-called circuit rapist. He was suspected to have raped more than 25 women in Davenport, Clinton, Burlington, Muscatine, Coralville, and Iowa City during the 1977 to 1978 timeframe. The circuit rapist attacked some women in their homes, but others in motels, and he typically put tape over their eyes and mouths and bound their hands behind them. He turned the TV or radio on loudly and used a knife to intimidate his victims. Needless to say, all of this matched up with the MO in Lee's case. So Council Bluffs investigators considered him extensively when Lee was killed, but it turned out Petoskey wasn't the circuit rapist. A guy named Daniel Bellman was. Petoskey was cleared of the rapes and of Lee's murder and ended up collecting $60,000 in a settlement from the Cedar Rapids police for a wrongful arrest. As for Daniel Bellman, who confessed to being the circuit rapist, he was arrested when a woman managed to escape his attempted assault in a parking lot and called police. In his car, they found a knife, a toy gun, latex gloves, shoestrings, and a pig mask. The married, middle-class suburban father and traveling salesman tearfully confessed to the series of rapes in eastern Iowa and western Illinois, saying he didn't know why he did it. I don't know whether he was looked into in Lee's case, but I didn't see any connection between Bellman and western Iowa where Lee was killed. Once they ran everything down, all leads dried up, and there was nowhere to turn. The case went cold. Fast forward to 2001, when a vaginal swab collected from Lee was submitted for updated DNA testing. The sample was quite degraded, but an Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations Criminalistics lab report, dated September 13, 2001, indicates that a DNA profile was obtained from sperm fraction of the vaginal swab at 13 STR loci, and this profile was entered into the state's Convicted Offender and Forensic Profile databases, CODIS. No hits were obtained, even though database searches continued periodically for years. In August 2011, all the physical evidence in Lee's case was resubmitted for updated testing. A lab report by Stacy Prawl at the DCI Labs reads, quote, "Screening tests performed on the vaginal swabs indicated the presence of seminal fluid. Spermatozoa were microscopically identified. A DNA profile was developed from the sperm fraction. The profile was consistent with the profile developed in 2001, end quote. Testing on Lee's left and right hand nail clippings found a mixture. No surprise, Lee was the major contributor to the mixture. Quote from the lab report, "The additional factors present were insufficient to determine the profile of the minor contributor." So now, in 2011, they had a good suspect profile for DNA comparison purposes, but no suspects. On September 20th, 2011, Detective Steve Andrews was working check fraud and credit card theft cases. Sergeant Dawson dumped the cold Lee Rotatori homicide file on his desk and suggested he familiarize himself with it. Once Andrews read through it, he thought the logical place to start was with getting a DNA sample from Lee's husband, Jerry Nemke. Everything pointed to him. Jerry Nemke was still alive and living in Florida. Detective Andrews contacted Detective John Columbia from the Tampa Police Department on October 10th and requested that he try to obtain a voluntary DNA sample from Jerry. Detective Columbia did so, calling on Jerry and finding him more than willing to submit a buccal swab. On October 31st, the sample was sent to the lab for testing and comparison against the suspect's sample and evidence. Somewhat shockingly, it took the Iowa DCI Criminalistics Lab 2 years to get around to conducting the testing. The reality was, they prioritized active cases, and Lee's case was at the bottom of the pile in terms of urgency. So in the meantime, Detective Andrews followed up on mentions he had seen in the original case file to the effect that Jerry had mentioned to someone that he was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy on Lee. Supposedly, it was to the tune of $45,000, about $141,000 in today's money. The life insurance company used by Lee's employer had been sold and broken up. The records were gone. Andrews had no luck verifying with certainty that there ever was a life insurance policy, or that Jerry Nemke had benefited in any way from his wife's murder. However, there were notes from a detective in the original case file mentioning that Lee might even have had 2 policies. Finally, after 2 years of waiting, on February 11, 2013, the DCI lab report eliminated Jerry Nemke as the source of the DNA profile obtained from the sperm fraction in the vaginal swabs. As Detective Andrews told Nonpareil, the results report was literally like getting punched in the gut by Mike Tyson. He had felt certain that Jerry Nemke, convicted murderer and florist, had somehow managed to slip to Council Bluffs and kill Lee. But he was wrong, and it was back to square one. The only positive about these cases taking so long to solve is that, finally, DNA becomes available, and Detective Andrews set about using what he had, the unknown suspect profile, to compare to every man in the case file. He doggedly started contacting the men who had been staying at the Best Western that night and asking them to submit DNA samples for comparison. Quote, I reached out to lots of them, okay? I reached out to them and ended up getting DNA from, Andrews said in an interview. Negative, 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 all the time. The case stalled again. Like many lawmen, Council Bluffs Police Captain Todd Wedham sat up and took notice when the Golden State Killer was arrested in 2018 using so-called new DNA technology that involved identifying the killer through his family tree. Captain Wedham knew that the Lee Rotatori case was pretty much dead in the water, absent some new evidence or leads. Maybe this new methodology was the solution. His department made the decision to pay for 1 round of research by Parabon Nanolabs. Captain Wedham requested that CBPD Crime Lab Manager Katie Petit arrange to provide a sample of the sperm fraction in Lee's evidence file to Parabon's partner lab for preparation of a SNP profile. Parabon told me that the sample was degraded and did not appear promising. The call rate was a mere 62.8%. The call rate is a measure of the proportion of SNP markers that are present in the sample. A lower call rate such as this one can mean that information is missing, so predictions as to DNA relationships cannot be made with as much confidence as if the sample had a call rate in the 90-plus percentile range. Nonetheless, the company was able to generate a phenotype of the killer. Parabon determined the suspect was a white male of Northern European descent with brown hair and blue eyes, a needle in a haystack in Iowa. In April of 2019, Council Bluffs approved Parabon moving forward with the forensic genealogy analysis. The initial forensic genealogy results were disappointing, though. Parabon uploaded the sample to GEDmatch, and the closest DNA relative in that database shared only 57 centimorgans with the killer, a 6 to 8 cousin of the suspect. But the genealogist did manage to identify 2 genetic networks the suspect belonged to from the DNA relatives in GEDmatch. 9 of the matches connected to a very large family with the surname Brown, descended from Samuel Brown, born in 1928, and his wife Nancy Joyce, born in 1938, from Henry County, Virginia. And another genetic network was descended from the marriage between Dempsey Honeycutt, born 1765, and Ruth Keyes, born 1766, from the Ozark Mountains of northern Arkansas. Each of these 2 couples had more than 12 children, and many of their children had large families as well, so the descendancy work would be extremely time-consuming. In her initial research of the children and grandchildren of these ancestral couples, the genealogist was unable to connect the Honeycutt and Brown families or identify any branches of the family who moved closer to the crime. Because the connections found were quite distant, doing descendancy research was not the most efficient use of time, so Parabon provided a list of other recommendations to help move the case forward more quickly. 2 of the recommendations in their initial report to the Council Bluffs investigators were to pay the additional upload fee and enter the unknown suspect's DNA profile into family tree DNA, and then use reference testers as needed to flesh out the family tree. Or they could wait and see if any more DNA relatives joined GEDmatch. As Captain Wedham said, quote, they told us basically, hey, kits are coming in every day. It's going to take one to break this thing open. At that point, it's a waiting game. We're waiting for someone that's a close enough relative to our murder suspect that would be the key, end quote. They decided to wait. Meanwhile, Detective Andrews was working the case the old-fashioned way, painstakingly going over the case file and trying to obtain DNA samples from men mentioned in it. In March of 2019, Detective Andrews tracked down the Assistant Director of Food Services who had gone boating at Lake Manawa with Lee in the days before her death, Larry B. He was living in Grand Rapids. The Grand Rapids Police Department Major Case Team Sergeant Gregory Griffin dispatched an officer to collect a voluntary DNA sample from Larry to be used for comparison. Larry cooperated and the sample was obtained and FedExed to Council Bluffs. Also in March 2019, Detective Andrews followed up on John Hadenfeld, the guy whom the maid claimed had green floral foam in his motel room. When Detective Andrews called the Sioux Rapids Police Chief, Timothy Porter, about obtaining a sample from Hadenfeld, Chief Porter said he knew Hadenfeld. They golfed together once a week. Hadenfeld readily agreed to give a sample, and Detective Andrews received a FedEx with the buccal swabs from him on March 19th. Next, Detective Andrews located the current address for the Food Services Director, whom Lee had been supposed to replace at Jenny Edmondson Hospital, Doug G. He was living in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus Police Department Homicide Cold Case Unit Sergeant Terry McConnell requested and obtained a buccal swab from Doug on March 13, 2019. All of these buccal swabs were sent to the lab and tested. They were all returned on May 22, 2019. The lab report dated May 22, 2019 eliminated all three men, Doug, Larry, and John Hadenfeld, as the contributors of the DNA found on the vaginal swabs. The case was stuck again. The small Council Bluffs police force could not afford to spend precious resources on the upload to family tree DNA and additional research that Parabon recommended. So they decided to wait it out and see if any more beneficial DNA relatives uploaded their DNA into GEDmatch. But then, in April 2020, they were contacted by Eric Schubert. You'll remember Eric Schubert from my episode on Maurice Chivarella. He was the then college student who was a forensic genealogy wunderkind, and he had helped out several agencies with their forensic genealogy cases. Remember, the best match they had in this case was a very distant cousin, someone who shared 57 centimorgans with the killer of Lee Rotatori, and 2 unconnected genetic networks, and that was it. Schubert contacted the Council Bluffs police chief by email and offered his services free of charge other than the family tree DNA upload charge, and they wisely took him up on that after vetting his credentials. Luckily for him, Schubert found much closer DNA relatives in family tree DNA, some as close as second cousin range, and started giving Detective Andrews name after name of people for reference testing to try to home in on the suspect's relatives. I saw the case reports, and Detective Andrews contacted many people, requesting that they give DNA samples to help them find a killer. He told me that the vast majority, roughly 98%, were eager to cooperate. It was tedious work, with long waits for results that would hopefully either zero in on the suspect or eliminate branches of the family tree to narrow down the search for the killer. This all went on for about a year. I'll give you a story or two behind the reference testing. Detective Andrews sent out several letters between April 27th and May 8th of 2020 to the DNA relatives whom Eric Schubert had suggested they obtain reference samples from to help narrow down the field of suspects. One of the women called him and said when she saw his letter and learned that they were investigating a cold case possibly committed by a distant relative of hers, she said she knew who did it, her brother. She said she had always suspected him of committing a murder. He was a truck driver back in the 80s who traveled America extensively. He had a severe cocaine addiction and was hot-tempered and quick to violence. He had several ex-wives and an ex-girlfriend to whom he had been abusive. She heard rumors through other family members that he'd been responsible for killing someone, and he had disappeared for a few years, starting in the summer of 1982. Well, that all sounded really good to the investigators, right? The problem was, when this woman's reference sample was analyzed, it showed she shared 469 centimorgans with the suspect. This meant that her brother could not have been the killer, as they would have shared out closer to 3,500 centimorgans. Even if she were a half-sister, the DNA relationship would have been much greater. Instead, she was a distant cousin of the man who ultimately turned out to be the killer. All in all, Detective Andrews and Eric Schubert did an awful lot of reference testing on this case. They were assisted by several reference testers who agreed to move DNA results from Ancestry, which is not searchable by law enforcement, over to Family Tree DNA, where Eric Schubert could see how all the information fit together. Schubert discovered that the killer's ancestors had very large families because of the sheer number of relatives who were in the trees. The reference testing helped them rule out lots of branches, but they weren't getting much closer to who the suspect actually was. In fact, it became more confusing because the numbers didn't add up. The place where the suspect should have appeared in the family tree based on his DNA relatives was not where he belonged according to the documentary evidence. The family tree they believed the suspect was in on the mother's side didn't match up with the father's side. In other words, they were probably looking at a misattributed parentage event. Suddenly, in February 2021, all the reference testing became unnecessary. This from Detective Andrews' report, quote, "On February 19, 2021, I received information from Parabon in reference to a 976.7 centimorgan match to our suspect that was discovered during the automated weekly monitoring of the case in their system. Following this discovery, additional analysis of the genealogical data was done, and a probable suspect in this case was developed and identified," end quote. A new, relatively close DNA relative had uploaded to GEDmatch, and he was the final link they needed to zero in on a suspect. What happened was, this was a man who had been given up for adoption. This could have been another obstacle for the genealogist, but this new DNA relative knew his biological parents' names and had sketched out a family tree for his bio family, so they could see exactly where he fit in with the genetic networks the suspect belonged to. They now knew that this new DNA relative was a descendant of John Lee and Laura Cordemus, the ancestors of a giant Mormon family, and that the Lee family was on the suspect's maternal side. The new 976 centimorgan relative fits squarely into a specific relational position. Based on the numbers, the suspect was this DNA relative's great-uncle, first cousin, or half-uncle. They could see that the new DNA relative had no first cousins who were the right age to be the killer back in '82. His only great-uncle was an elderly religious leader, an unlikely candidate for a rapist and killer. But there was another man in the new DNA relative's tree who on paper was a full uncle, but who the genealogist suspected was a half-uncle, the result of a misattributed parentage event. And he had a criminal record and was in his 30s at the time of Lee's murder. This man was descended from the Lee family on his mother's side. So they looked a lot closer at the male children of one of the Lee family members, Iva Lee, born in 1912. Iva had 4 sons, Vernon, Brady, John, and Thomas Freeman. Brady and Vernon had both died before Lee Rotatori was killed. They were out. John didn't fit with the lineage that the genealogist had mapped out. That left one brother, Thomas Freeman. He was the right age to be the killer in 1982 and matched the phenotype. The only problem? The only way the relationships worked was if Thomas had an unknown father, and Brady, John, and Vernon were his half-brothers. Yet his birth certificate showed that his father was Vernon Freeman, Iva's husband. The genetic research had found another genetic network that the suspect was descended from, a marriage between members of the Davis and Bearden families. This marriage had produced 12 Davis children. But despite extensive research, the genealogists could not find a connection between the Lee and Davis families, and no one had any ties to Council Bluffs. But as noted by the genealogist, the DNA of the suspect, Thomas Freeman, did not align with the DNA sharing amounts of the others in the Freeman family, his 3 purported full brothers and his father, Vernon. In fact, just as the genealogist had suspected, Vernon Sr. wasn't his father at all. And what was weird was, everyone knew this. Interviews with several family members of Thomas Freeman revealed that actually his real father was Elmer Davis. Elmer was the owner of a local coal delivery company. When his crew came over to the Freeman house to shovel coal into the furnace, Elmer would go inside and shovel something else into Iva. And lo and behold, Thomas was born. Detective Andrews told me that this was an open secret, and not even really a secret. Iva Lee was married to Vernon Freeman and had 4 sons of record with him, but Elmer Davis was Thomas's real father, and everyone, including Thomas, his siblings, the entire Davis clan, and his father of record, Vernon Freeman, knew it. Thomas Freeman being the out-of-wedlock son of Elmer Davis was quite confusing because Detective Andrews noted that the then 23-year-old Thomas Freeman had been arrested on July 4, 1970, for burglarizing his bio-father Elmer Davis's house and stealing 6 guns and a pork shoulder and a ham from his father's freezer. The reports on this whole escapade are lost, so we just don't know what happened here or whether it was all a misunderstanding. We do know that Thomas was indicted for this offense, but we don't know what happened after that.
Have you ever wiped with a piece of dry, single-ply toilet paper and wondered, is this as good as it gets? Well, it's not. It gets a lot better thanks to the wet, extra-large cleaning power of Dude Wipes. They comfortably clean up whatever TP leaves behind on your behind. It's time to stop being an a-hole to your b-hole and start experiencing the confident clean of Dude Wipes. Available at Amazon and at major retailers nationwide. Dude Wipes. Best clean, pants down.
Make their holiday unforgettable with a gift that says it all from Pandora Jewelry. A gift that tells a story and shows you know theirs. That doesn't just sparkle, but speaks. From new festive charms to forever rings and personal engravings.
This season, give a gift that's perfectly theirs. Whether you're shopping for a shiny surprise for your significant other, matching bracelets to celebrate your friendship, or a heartfelt gift for a family member, say more this holiday season with Pandora.
I always look forward to the holidays because I live to give all the women in my life jewelry with a little something special engraved on it, just to show them I care with something personalized. You know, I love to get some gifts myself, and a man wearing jewelry is quite cool, if you ask me. Shop now at Pandora.net or visit your closest Pandora store.
This is Jacob Goldstein from What's Your Problem? When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
I talked to Detective Andrews about all that reference testing work they did while waiting for a new DNA relative to upload. He joked that it was all for nothing. But that wasn't true because all the background research they did on the family trees, trying to find the killer, gave them the names they needed to talk to in order to fill in the blanks on Thomas Freeman's life and who his real father was. It was time to confirm the hypothesis. But it wasn't going to be as easy as obtaining a surreptitious DNA sample from Thomas Freeman. When they researched him, they quickly learned that he was dead. I know, it's disappointing. But Freeman didn't die in a car crash or of some wasting illness. No, he was murdered. He was gunned down just weeks after Lee was killed. And his death is absolutely believed to be connected to the murder of Lee Rotatori. But before we get into that, let's talk about how the investigators confirmed that Thomas Freeman was their guy. Detective Andrews reached out to Sergeant Alicia Barr of the Illinois State Police, inquiring as to whether any samples might have been collected at the time of Freeman's autopsy that would now facilitate testing of his DNA. The answer was yes. The pathologist had removed Freeman's right hand and retained it. But this good news was soon tempered by very bad news. The hand, along with other items of evidence collected in connection with Freeman's death investigation, had been lost. They were, however, able to locate a photo of Freeman to see if he matched the phenotype. The Williamson County Sheriff's Office in Marion, Illinois, had an arrest record for Freeman for the burglary of his purported father, Elmer Davis's home, and was able to produce a photo of him. It showed Freeman as white, 6 feet tall, 170 pounds, with blue eyes, brown hair, and glasses, exactly as predicted by Parabon in their snapshot analysis. But they still needed his DNA, or the next best thing, so they decided to enlist the help of his surviving daughter, M. Master Sergeant Jamie Brunsworth of the Illinois State Police approached M, explained the situation, obtained samples willingly given by M, and sent them to the DCI for analysis. Their lab report dated October 13, 21, concluded that the probability of paternity of the suspect to M. Freeman was 99.9979%. This confirmed there was indeed a parent-child relationship between the DNA found at the scene of Lee's murder and Thomas Freeman's daughter, M. It was him. Thomas Freeman raped and murdered Lee Rotatori. Thomas Oscar Freeman was born on May 10, 1947, in Herrin, Illinois. According to his birth certificate, his parents were Vernon J. and Iva Lee Freeman. As we know from following the DNA trail, Vernon was not his real father. Thomas Freeman had 3 brothers, 2 of whom, Brady Lee and Vernon J., died before he did. The family was part of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Thomas joined the Air Force at age 18, but received a medical discharge before finishing basic training. He apparently became pretty ill because, on September 23, 1979, he underwent open heart surgery at St. Vincent's Medical Center in L.A. His sternum and ribcage were wired back together with wire and metal clips after the surgery. which is how they concretely identified him when his body was found. Sometime after the surgery, he moved back to Illinois, where he lived off Harco Road in West Frankfort. He was married but was separated from his wife Mary at the time of Lee's murder. Freeman was a strange guy. He carried a nickel-plated .25 caliber pistol and was one of those end-of-days survivalists who was prepared at any moment to live in the woods in the event of nuclear war, participating in military-style drills and practicing guerrilla war tactics. His brother said Freeman was a very secretive person. He didn't have much of a criminal record other than the odd burglary of a suspected biodad's house in July 1970, but he was reported to be a pot dealer and known to smoke pot. He had a number of odd jobs and would disappear for days at a time, telling his family he was an over-the-road truck driver for Yellow Trucking Company out of Kansas City. However, that company was unable to find any records relating to Freeman ever being employed by them. Before he disappeared in early August 1982, Freeman told people he was moving to Chicago to work as a bodyguard. The guy was shady, but it wasn't known until nearly 40 years after his own murder just how shady he was. This is a quote from a press release issued on Friday, February 25, 2022, by Council Bluffs Police Captain Todd Wedham. Quote, "Further investigation revealed that Thomas Freeman was also the victim of a murder. On October 30th, 1982, Freeman's decomposed body was found buried in a shallow grave near Carbondale, Illinois. Freeman had been shot multiple times. He was 35 years old at the time of his death. It was reported that he had been dead for about 3 months before his body was discovered. Council Bluffs investigators are currently working with the Illinois State Police to determine if Freeman's murder was somehow linked to his involvement in Rotatori's death." End quote. I obtained the original incident reports from the unsolved murder of Thomas Freeman. This is from a report dated November 4th, 1982, from the Union County Sheriff's Office. Quote, "On October 30th, 1982, at approximately 7:30 a.m., a decomposed body was discovered by hunters. The subject appeared to have been shot with a small caliber firearm. 3 projectiles were recovered at the scene." End quote. The hunters were 3 members of the Meyer family who were camping out while deer hunting on land owned by the U.S. government in Shawnee National Forest, just miles from the border with land owned by Southern Illinois University. While they were stalking through the woods in search of prey, Brian Meyer saw some blue jeans under some leaves. They went to a nearby farm and called the sheriff's department. Investigators from the Union County Sheriff's Office arrived and observed the body of a man lying on his back. He was dressed in blue jeans, green socks, a tan and white cowboy-style plaid shirt, and a black leather belt. Bullet holes in his shirt indicated he had been shot in the chest 4 times. When they moved his body, which was largely skeletonized, with bits of tissue still evident, they found 3 bullets on the ground under it. The presence of the bullets at the scene indicated, of course, that whoever the dead man was, he had been shot where he was found. The 4th projectile was located in his chest at autopsy. The pathologist, Dr. Thompson, collected a number of items into evidence, including the unidentified victim's right hand, to be preserved for fingerprint purposes, as well as beard and head hair, all his clothing, a comb found in his pocket, and so on. The death investigation determined the victim had likely been deceased for about 2 months, maybe longer. The bullets that killed him were .25 caliber projectiles exhibiting 6 lands and grooves, but having been outdoors for some time, they were corroded to the point that they weren't deemed suitable for comparison. The story about the unidentified body being found in Shawnee National Forest hit the airwaves on the television news on November 1st. That day, the Union County Sheriff's Department received a phone call from a John Freeman of Lakewood, Illinois. He said he had talked to his mom and she suggested he call because she heard on the news about an unidentified body being found. They were concerned that it was Thomas Freeman, John's brother, who lived in West Frankfort, 30 miles from Carbondale, the village where the body was found. Freeman had been missing for 4 months. Well, it was him. Freeman was identified by comparing his fingerprints with prints already on file at the Williamson County Sheriff's Department in Marion, Illinois, and comparing the wire and metal fasteners in his sternum to the records of his open-heart surgery. Freeman's family, his mother Iva, his daughter Em, and his brother John, held graveside services for him at Denning Cemetery on November 12, 1982. He was buried and not cremated, but Council Bluffs police later decided that given the definitiveness of the paternity test they had done on Em, they did not need to exhume him. The Illinois Department of Law Enforcement actively investigated Freeman's murder back in 1982. They interviewed Iva Freeman about the death of her son, Thomas. She told them the last time she talked to her son was August 5th, when he called to tell her he was leaving on a haul and he'd be gone 3 to 4 weeks. He hadn't been heard from since. She said before he vanished, Freeman routinely received phone calls at her house from a number of people and would go out to meet them for unknown reasons. Police obtained copies of the phone records of calls to and from the house, as well as other places Freeman, who was somewhat transient, was known to stay. On August 5th, the last day he was seen, Freeman was at a friend's house when he received a phone call. That friend, Judy L., reported that he said loudly, "I'll tell you when I get there," and then even more emphatically, "I'll tell you when I get there," and then he hung up and said he had to go meet someone. When he left, he told Judy that he would call her the next day, but he never did. He also didn't show up weeks later for the Willie Nelson concert the two had tickets to. To be clear, no one knows exactly when Thomas Freeman was murdered, but my money is on this August 5th phone call, the last time he was heard from, being from his killer, someone he left to meet. That was also the day he called his mom and said he was leaving town for a few weeks. It's doubtful that he knew that, in fact, he was leaving forever. In November, Freeman's beige AMC Ambassador was found parked in the lot at the Red Lion Inn in Marion, Illinois. The vehicle had been there since early August, according to the staff. Freeman was not registered at the inn. Even though we now know that he killed Lee just about 6 weeks before his own murder in early August 1982, nothing in the car directly connected him to the crime. However, there was a knife found attached to an army belt and 2 ski masks. 2 other fillet knives were also found in the car. Police found a usable print that was not Thomas's on the passenger side window. It's unknown whether any of these items remain in evidence and could possibly be tested for Lee's DNA. I didn't see further mention of these items in the case file, but it doesn't bode well that some things appear to have been lost. As I mentioned before, the ISP reported that the evidence collected in connection with the original Freeman investigation had been lost, including items of his clothing and his right hand. This is why the investigators hadn't had any of Freeman's DNA on file and had to obtain a sample from his daughter, M. I contacted the Illinois State Police to get a comment about this, but they didn't get back to me. The investigation into Freeman's death petered out really quickly. Police looked into a number of people he hung out with and checked into rumors he'd been killed in connection with the drug trade. One witness who knew Freeman from school reported that he heard Freeman's death had something to do with a, quote, contract killing, likely connected to dope. In the end, police could find no evidence of this, no motive, and no suspects. The case stalled and remains officially unsolved, but the Illinois State Police has renewed interest in it. Okay, so I think you're beginning to get the picture here. Lee Rotatori was murdered at the Best Western in Council Bluffs, Iowa on June 26, 1982. Her husband, Jerry Nemke, was a convicted murderer who had a pretty much ironclad alibi. It turned out that Lee was killed by a long-haul trucker who disappeared after telling his family he was leaving on a haul and heading out to meet an unidentified person after a contentious phone call. He was found months later, shot dead in a forest area not far from his home, his car abandoned in a motel parking lot. Nothing other than the DNA connected him to Lee's case. He was not registered at the Best Western that night. He was not even placed in Council Bluffs at all. But he himself was killed within weeks of her death. As the Council Bluffs Police Captain Todd Wedham told the Gazette, quote, "I'm not a real big believer in coincidences. We know who killed Lee. Now we're working to figure out if Freeman's death is somehow connected to him murdering Lee," end quote. This wasn't just an investigator's hunch. There was reason for the police to believe that both unsolved cases were related, and that one man was behind both. Lee's husband, Jerry Nemke, passed away on March 12, 2019 in Clearwater, Florida. Remember, he had given a DNA sample back in 2011, and it showed he had nothing to do with his wife's death. But now, investigators were speculating that maybe he did have something to do with it after all. Nemke had gotten into a new relationship shortly after Lee died. This was with a woman whose first initial is T. Jerry was working as a courier for Quality Air Carriers and would drive bank documents between banks in Oklahoma and Texas. T also worked for a courier service. The two met in late 1982 or early 1983 and were married on November 2, 1985. T had a son from a previous relationship named James, who became Jerry Nemke's stepson. James contacted Detective Andrews on November 13, 2019, and said he had some information for him. Now that Jerry Nemke was dead, James was comfortable passing this information along. While Jerry was alive, James said he worried about his mother T's safety, so he kept the information to himself. This all happened as the forensic genealogy was still stalled, and Thomas Freeman had not yet been identified. But James's information supported a theory that Detective Andrews had started to form. James told the detective that a few years earlier, James had had drinks one night with a close friend of Jerry's named Fat Carl. And Fat Carl told James that Jerry had gotten drunk one night and told Fat Carl that he had hired an African-American buddy of his from Joliet to kill his first wife, Lee Rotatori. Jerry knew exactly when it was going to happen, so he made sure to have an impenetrable alibi. James said that Jerry told Fat Carl he paid the hired hitman off from the money paid out to him from his wife's life insurance policy. James also said that Jerry had been transporting prescription drugs via the courier service and stealing pain meds from the prescriptions. So naturally, Detective Andrews was very intrigued by this tip. Of course, he had always suspected Jerry Nemke of having something to do with Lee's death, but he'd never been able to prove it. If the tipster was right, that was because Jerry hadn't been directly responsible, but had paid someone else to do the deed. The tip about the hired killer being black didn't exactly mesh with the facts, since the phenotype indicated that he was white. But since this was third-hand information, it could have just been wrong. Andrews decided to try to dig up more information on Jerry Nemke. Detective Andrews interviewed Jerry's second wife, T, on November 26, 2019. She told him they'd been married in 1985 and had divorced on December 2, 1988. The beginning of the end of their marriage was when he took over the business portion of a biker bar called the Elm Tree. He lost the bar after 6 months, and their relationship fell apart. But they continued to live together until about 1996, when he moved to Florida. There, he married his third wife, Rebecca, on January 1, 1998. But even after that, he continued to stay in touch with his second wife, T, and Jerry visited her regularly, staying with her for weekend visits and maintaining their sexual relationship. This went on until about 2010. T told Detective Andrews that one night when Jerry was drunk, he told her about his first wife's murder and said he'd been shown to have an alibi, being placed in another city at the time. After Lee's death, Jerry had collected on her rather large life insurance policy. He told T that he used some of it to buy a motorcycle and gave some of it to Lee's son, M. This was a very important piece of information. Detective Andrews had not even been able to verify the existence of the life insurance policy, even though the original detective's notes said there might have been 2 policies. Now, T reported that Jerry admitted he had profited off Lee's murder. And remember, the tipster, James, said Fat Carl told him that Jerry had paid the assassin with funds he had collected from Lee's life insurance policy. It was starting to look as though the murder-for-hire theory might have legs. T told Detective Andrews that she was aware of Jerry's stint on death row for killing Marilyn Duncan by hitting her with bricks and kicking her to death. And she also knew about Lee's death. Yet, she said she didn't fear for her own life until toward the end of their marriage in 1987 or 1988. They were both working for courier services, and Jerry said he thought they should both have life insurance policies in place just in case. They went to arrange for the paperwork, and Jerry told T to make him the sole beneficiary of her policy, even though she had a son, James. Meanwhile, she found out that Jerry had made his sister the sole beneficiary of his own policy. Something was really not right about that. Detective Andrews thinks that Jerry was setting things up so that T could be taken out next. She recalled that a friend of Jerry's pulled her aside once and warned her not to piss Jerry off. There was more. T related to Detective Andrews that Jerry regularly had 3 or 4 different P.O. boxes that he changed out often, and she wasn't allowed to access any of them. However, she did see a letter sometime in 1986 or 1987. She didn't recognize who it was from or the return address, but Jerry told her it was from an old friend of his that he met in prison who was asking him for $500. So this is about where Detective Andrews was in the investigation when the forensic genealogy report came in suggesting that the investigators take a look at Thomas Freeman. It all fit. Detective Andrews took note of the circumstantial evidence that Jerry Nemke had hired Thomas Freeman to kill his wife. Freeman had no other known violent crimes. What he did to Lee was not typical of him. Had Nemke put him up to it? If so, how had they crossed paths? Was there any concrete connection between Jerry Nemke and Thomas Freeman? Detective Andrews noted that Freeman had done some time in prison for the burglary episode, but not at the same time that Jerry was in for Marilyn's murder. But Andrews noted that when Jerry was released from prison, he lived 15 miles away from Thomas Freeman. And he told me that, quote, I was able to link a man that was in prison with Jerry to Thomas, end quote. Thomas was too young to have been in prison with Jerry, but the third party was incarcerated with Jerry, and he was a friend/co-worker of Thomas Freeman's. The circumstances of Lee's murder point to her husband Jerry having a role. Detective Andrews and I shot some theories back and forth about how Jerry pulled this off. But Jerry was smart, and this will all have to remain speculative because none of it has been proven. So here's what may have happened. Jerry and Lee got together with lightning speed after his release from prison in 1978. They were married within 6 months of meeting. Jerry may have targeted Lee as a career woman with a corporate job, one of whose benefits was a significant life insurance payout in the event that she was killed during travel for her service master job, which was why she was in Council Bluffs. When Lee expressed interest in the Council Bluffs job, Jerry got ready to make his move. We don't know when Jerry got himself the job at Gill's service station, the one that placed him in New Nica, Michigan, until 10 o'clock on the night of the murder. But I believe that was all part of him establishing an alibi. The original case file has some indication that he had started that job relatively recently. He knew that he had to show definitively that he was in town while his wife was getting killed 617 miles away. He made sure to talk to Lee that night while at work, where his boss overheard him having a normal conversation with her. And Jerry's second job was a floral delivery guy. What better ruse to get Lee to open the door, even at night, than to accept a flower delivery from her husband? Detective Andrews told me he thinks it's possible that Jerry either told Lee that he had sent her something special, or he left her a message at the hotel that a delivery was on the way. In that case, Lee would think nothing of answering the door to accept a gorgeous bouquet of fresh flowers from her beloved spouse. Meanwhile, and this is the most uncertain part of the theory, Jerry had somehow aligned with Thomas Freeman. The two were likely connected by their mutual acquaintance, Jerry's prison mate, but who knows how the introduction and communications went down. We know that after he was released from prison in his 30s, Jerry enrolled in a college in Carbondale, Illinois, about 15 miles from Cobden, where Freeman's body was found. He's familiar with the area and has a history with the area, Captain Wedham said. We don't know whether Freeman and Jerry actually met in person, until the fateful meeting where it's believed Jerry shot Freeman. Jerry might have learned from his prison buddy that Freeman was a trucker who could be out of town on a long-haul road trip to Council Bluffs without anyone batting an eye. Maybe Freeman had told this mutual connection that he needed money. It was almost certainly Jerry who devised the plan whereby Freeman would come to the motel where Lee was staying, posing as a flower delivery guy. Jerry would have been able to tell Freeman Lee's room number, so he didn't have to attract attention by stopping at the front desk to ask for it. Whether Lee was expecting the delivery or not, she was in her nightshirt, so she got her jeans on and opened the door. As soon as she did, Freeman assailed her right inside the door. There was a struggle, and the green floral foam got all over the floor right inside the entrance. Freeman subdued Lee with the tape and ligatures he brought with him and turned the TV on loudly so neighboring rooms wouldn't hear anything suspicious. Pursuant to Jerry's instructions, he didn't prolong Lee's death, stabbing her with a single lethal blow to the heart that would have killed her very quickly. Then he gathered up the mangled flowers, removed and packed up the tape and ligatures, sheathed his knife, and walked out the door, leaving Lee to be found by the maid the next morning. The only piece of evidence he failed to remove from the scene was the green floral foam, ground to bits on the carpet. It would have been impossible to eradicate all signs of it. But think about all the other cases we have heard about on this show. How many of the killers take pains to remove and take away the tape over their victims' mouths and eyes, remove and take away the bindings, stab the victim just once in exactly the right spot? Generally, it doesn't happen that way. And frankly, what I've heard about Thomas Freeman, he wasn't all that smart. Someone told him to leave no traces. Of course, we don't know whether Jerry anticipated that Freeman would rape Lee. Detective Andrews and I talked about whether Jerry would have sanctioned this. It's my theory that he did not. and when the papers reported that Lee was raped, he was angry. Hence, the phone call to Freeman where he was overheard repeating, "I'll tell you when I get there." Jerry was calling Freeman on this deviation from the plan. In some sick way, Jerry might have wanted his wife dead, but not wanted her violated in that way. Or perhaps he just worried that the semen could somehow be traced back to his assassin. I also wonder about the jewelry that was taken from Lee's body. You'll recall that the original detective's notes indicate that Jerry seemed quite concerned with the personal items of Lee's that were missing from the scene. Some were taken, yet some were left behind. I have to wonder whether he instructed Freeman which pieces of jewelry to take, and if so, why. Presumably, the arrangement between Freeman and Jerry was, as Fat Carl related. Jerry was motivated to eliminate his wife for the insurance proceeds and agreed to pay Freeman out of his windfall. Perhaps Freeman was also permitted to keep the cash he took from Lee's room and the jewelry he stole. We can't verify any of this. Council Bluffs detectives looked in area pawn shops for Lee's jewelry, but I'd bet that either Freeman pawned it back in Illinois or brought it to his meeting with Jerry as instructed, and Jerry collected it. As Freeman was carrying out his end of the deal in Council Bluffs, Jerry was back in Utica, engineering things so he was seen by as many people as possible. Detective Andrews learned from Lee's family and friends that generally, Jerry was reclusive. He didn't really interact much with her family and wasn't very involved in her daily life. At the few family gatherings they attended together, he would sit on the couch and drink beer while Lee mingled. Same with social gatherings in Michigan. But on the morning of Friday, June 26, 1982, Jerry made sure he was seen at Hackley Hospital and at the stable, even though as a rule he did not frequent either location. He was noted to have told Clara, when returning the borrowed items to her, "Lee wanted you to have things back." They weren't moving imminently. There was no reason for those errands to be done on that particular day. But it worked. Police could not place him at the scene of the crime, and he got away with murder. 6 weeks later, in early August 1982, he arranged to meet with Freeman to pay him what he owed him. This would have been right around the time that Lee's life insurance policy, or policies, paid up. But Jerry had no intention of sharing the wealth. He met up with Freeman somewhere near Freeman's home and marched him into the Carbondale woods and shot him. He then parked Freeman's car 17 miles away at the Red Lion Inn, wiped it down, and split. 29 years later, he was more than happy to cooperate with Detective Andrews' request for a DNA sample. He was probably ecstatic to do so, knowing it would exonerate him. There are a few glaring holes in this theory, things we just don't know. How did Jerry and Freeman communicate? After Freeman's death, Illinois police looked extensively at his phone records. From what I saw in the reports, they never found any records of calls to or from Michigan, and there were certainly none to a phone number connected to anyone named Jerry Nemke. Another thing we don't know is whether Thomas Freeman was the man seen carrying the, quote, unprofessional-looking bouquet of flowers in the Best Western on the night Lee was killed. The sketches prepared by the witnesses don't really look like Freeman, Detective Andrews tells me. Furthermore, we don't know any more about the floral foam allegedly observed by the maid in another room in the hotel. It's possible that she was mistaken and the substance was something else. It's also possible that Freeman spent the night in the hotel and tracked the floral foam in on his person. However, it seems to me very unlikely that he would have wanted to have any connection to the scene of the crime, and his name certainly was not on the hotel registry, so if he did stay there, he did it under an assumed name. I'm much more inclined to think he likely drove off on one of the highways at the interchange, removing himself and the incriminating evidence from the scene as expeditiously as possible. Another question is whether Jerry targeted Lee from the get-go. They married within 6 months of meeting, so it's pretty clear he swept her off her feet. But was it all a sham? Remember, Lee had a really good job with strong professional prospects and was making enough money that she was ordered to pay child support to her college professor husband in their divorce. There is evidence indicating that she had at least one life insurance policy on her as well. Did Jerry learn all this and quickly devise a plan to marry Lee? It's a pretty cynical take on the whole thing, but remember, we don't even know whether Lee knew of Jerry's past and that he had bludgeoned a woman to death with a brick. Her family certainly did not know. Was Lee the victim not only of a murder for hire, but a long game of deception, deceit, and manipulation by her husband, Jerry Nemke? After Lee's killer was identified, the nonpareil did an interview with her surviving siblings, Anne and Greg. Greg said, "It's nice to know that they were able to resolve the case. I only wish that my parents were here to hear that." Anne agreed. "I wish it could have been years ago," Greg said. Greg has been in touch with Lee's son M, who was 11 when his mother died, but M has opted to stay out of the public eye and, in fact, has not even talked to Detective Andrews. Detective Andrews told the Nonpareil that after the case was solved, he got in touch with the original investigator, Lyle Brown, who was a detective at the time. He retired in the 90s, unable to solve the case. Brown told Andrews, quote, "This is one of those cases that stayed with me ever since I left. I think about this case all the time." Andrews said Brown was very happy and proud that the agency was finally able to bring the case to a close. All his legwork had not broken the case, but the CBPD's preservation of evidence and careful documentation of the case file is what enabled the modern investigators to unveil the killer and come up with the theory of what happened. "It's extremely satisfying," Andrews told the Nonpareil of finally naming Lee's killer. "There were high points and low points throughout the whole process. All the while you're hoping to get to this point, but never knowing if you'll make it or not. But when you get the confirmation that everything you worked for has come to fruition, it's exciting to say the least." So while Lee Rotatori's murderer has been named, we can't say that every aspect of her case has been wrapped up in a nice little bow. Thomas Freeman's homicide remains an open investigation. His daughter, M, readily agreed to give a DNA sample identifying him as Lee's killer, knowing that doing so would renew interest in her father's unsolved murder. And it did. The ISP is investigating. Tragically, M's own son, Robert Delmore Jr., was killed earlier in 2023, shot to death in Carbondale just like his grandfather. A suspect has been arrested in that case. After 40 years, Lee Rotatori's case has taken a significant step toward resolution thanks to forensic genealogy. And if you're one of the bad guys, they're coming for you. Infinite thanks to Council Bluffs Detective Steve Andrews for hashing out the details of this case with me, even though he's trying to retire in peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.